Alright friends, what happens when Shadowheart decides that she doesn't like someone? Turns out she just melts their face off. We're gonna pick Lae'zel for no particular reason. Lae'zel even saw this coming and is wearing the protective plate for resistance to necrotic damage, but as you can see here, it's not gonna help. Alright, let's get to the build. Hello my friends and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering a build I'm calling the Death Dealer of Shar, a lore-friendly Shadowheart build for Honor Mode. This necromantic warrior uses the power of death, rot, and decay to putrefy her enemies, leaving nothing in her wake but oozing puddles sinking slowly into the cold earth. We are a devastating damage spellcaster, both at long range and in melee, and with damage over time spells in addition to our excellent burst spellcasting, and we back it all up with excellent melee attacks, great defensive capabilities, and the ability to buff up our team if we get tired of destroying our foes. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Eric N. for the $2 donation, Sevnir for the $20, Jamerson McGradner for the $25, and Poor Biggles and NR Games for becoming channel members. Thank you so much, my friends. It really means a lot. Alright, let's start the slaughter. I'm using Shadowheart as the example character here because, of course, this build is inspired by her lore and is primarily a cleric build. But also from a mechanical standpoint, she makes an excellent choice for building this character, specifically when chosen as an origin character for your run. At time of recording, when you start a new game with Origin Shadowheart, you can change her racial cantrip, but not when you respec. So if you start a new run as Origin Shadowheart, you can change her racial cantrip to Booming Blade. This character makes a ton of attacks, so Booming Blade is a massive damage spike for us, so it makes Origin Shadowheart an excellent choice from a mechanical perspective, as well as a lore one. For the same reason, Origin Astarion will also work excellently for this build, and if you're building this as a custom character, then your best picks are going to be High Elf or High Half Elf for the same reason. Booming Blade is just that powerful. Other great options include Halfling, because this character is going to be concentrating on spells and making weapon attacks. Rerolling ones is going to come up a lot for this character. Wood Elf or Half Wood Elf for the bonus movement speed, or Githyanki for the once per day Misty Step, which we don't naturally get access to. All of these are excellent options and will power up the character significantly, but races with Booming Blade access are the strongest from a mechanical standpoint. What we take at first level on this build is actually quite flexible. We're going to be taking both Cleric and Druid levels in order to max out the necrotic damage that we do with every attack. But if you want to wait on the Druid levels until you reach a point in Shadowheart's story where you think she would awaken her connection to Shar more heavily, and therefore gain the ability to do this necrotic damage, then that's certainly a viable choice. In order to maximize the progression of the build, though, we're going to start with a level of Druid. This is going to let us start making melee attacks right away, because when we take a Druid level, we can take Shillelagh. Shillelagh will allow us to use our spellcasting ability for attack rolls and damage with a staff or club, or in the early game, a torch, which is going to let this character be incredibly efficient as an early game damage dealer, because it basically turns us into one of the best melee fighters in the very early game, alongside a great ranged combatant with our powerful spellcasting cantrips that we're going to get next level. So without even resting or casting any of our spells, we're going to be an extremely potent force. In addition to Shillelagh, we're also going to take Thorn Whip. This, of course, is a unique cantrip to Druids and gives you a lot of tactical options to pull enemies around. Pulling an enemy into your Spirit Guardians or into your melee attacks is pretty dangerous for those enemies, or over spike growth and things like that. So Thorn Whip, it gives you a ton of optionality in combat. For our ability score selection, there's two different ways that we can build this character's ability scores depending on whether we want to use a stat item or not. As a wisdom character, we get access to Khalid's Gift, which is a stat item no other character wants, so we have that as an option. So we can either build 16 in wisdom, 16 in dexterity, and 14 in constitution, as well as a 12 in either strength if you want a little more jump distance and carry weight, or intelligence if you want better saving throws. Either of these make good options as well. Or we can build 17 wisdom and then put a 10 into either strength or intelligence. In general, intelligence is going to be a little stronger mechanically, but strength may be a little bit more fun for you depending on the quality of life benefits of being able to carry just a little bit more stuff. If we do this, we get to save a feat and use either Ethel's Hair or Khalid's Gift to still hit 20 wisdom with only 1 ability score improvement. Since there's some really good feats for this character, that's the example that we're going to give here. For our skill selection, the only important one to have is Perception. This is another advantage of starting as a Druid, is that you get to be a Wisdom character who has Perception as a skill, which means that you can cover this for your party. Otherwise, you are probably not going to be passing too many dialogue checks or contributing lockpicking or anything to the party, so Perception is the only reasonably important skill that you need to select, because that's what you bring to the table. That's it for level 1. Let's go to level 2. At character level 2, we're immediately going to leave Druid and take a level of Cleric, getting access to Death Domain Cleric. This makes us one of the strongest early game characters in the game as soon as we hit level 2, because as a Death Domain Cleric, we can double up on our Necromancy cantrips, making us one of the highest damage ranged characters in the game. We can hit 2 different enemies with a cantrip, which is more damage than pretty much any other character is doing at this point. And we also have one of the best melee weapons in the game because we are a Druid with Shillelagh torches, which hit harder than anything except a greatsword at these very early levels. So it makes us just an absolute monster in early game combats, which of course are some of the most dangerous points in honor mode, so it can help you really smooth out the early game. For our cantrip selection, we're going to take our Death Domain cantrip first, and we're going to take Bone Chill. We will later get this when we select Spore Druid, so you may want to respec and choose a different cantrip as soon as you get Spore Druid, but this is just too powerful a cantrip not to have in the early game. Just an incredible ranged damage spell that we can, again, double up on. So this is the one that we want, because it's not available as a normal Cleric cantrip. And then for our normal Cleric cantrips, we're going to go ahead and grab Guidance, Toll the Dead, because Toll the Dead, again, an extremely strong damage spell that we can split as a Death Cleric, and gives us a saving throw targeting effect in addition to our armor class targeting effects with Bone Chill and, of course, our weapon attacks. And then for our last spell, there's a bunch of different options. Resistance is very useful. You can take Bursting Sinew for the flavor and fun of it. You can take Blade Ward to make yourself a little bit tankier. I'm going to take Bursting Sinew because this character is all about death and decay. It mostly doesn't matter what the last cantrip we select is, so let's take the most fun one. For our spell selection at this level, we're going to go ahead and grab all of the best Cleric spells in addition to our Druid spells. So we're going to pick up Bless. This will make our attacks even more likely to hit, and it's very much worth concentrating on Bless for yourself. You have a lot of attack rolls, and so this character can be even more powerful in the early game if you want to spend a level 1 spell slot on just buffing up yourself and your team. Command, of course, is the best control spell in the game. Healing Word, great as a bonus action. And Sanctuary gives us an awesome panic button, so that rounds out our toolset, in addition to all of the power that we have just from our cantrips. At level 3, we're taking our second level of Cleric, and we get Channel Divinity Touch of Death. This increases our damage even further. Whenever you hit a creature with a melee attack, you can use your Channel Divinity to deal extra necrotic damage. The damage here is equal to 5, plus double your Cleric level, which at this level is 4, so 9 extra damage. That's the same as a Paladin using a level 1 spell slot to Smite, and we get this once per short rest, so we can add a ton of burst damage in the early game by using this ability. What's more, it doesn't just trigger on melee attacks, though we're good at doing that. It also triggers on any on weapon attacks. It triggers on any melee attack, including spells. So when we take Inflict Wounds for even higher burst damage, we can use Inflict Wounds and Touch of Death in the same action to deal an average of 16.5 damage from the Inflict Wounds, plus 9 damage from the Touch of Death. That's a huge amount of early game burst damage for just a level 1 spell slot, and we can increase it even further because we now have level 2 spell slots, so you can even upcast Inflict Wounds if you want. At character level 4, we're taking our 3rd level of Cleric, getting access to 2nd level Cleric spells. We also get blindness from our domain as a Death Domain Cleric, and while this isn't a spell you usually want to waste a prepared spell slot on because it's quite situational, when you always have it prepared, it's very powerful, especially for this character that makes a lot of attacks. When an enemy is blind, your attacks are made with advantage, so that's more hits and more critical hits, which makes this character even more consistent. There's a lot of enemies with weak con saves in the early game, so you can land this pretty reliably, and that can help you win some of the more difficult early game fights. In addition to that, we're also adding in Hold Person, which is an even more powerful debuff that targets Wisdom and gives you automatic critical hits. That includes automatic critical hits on Inflict Wounds. So a Hold Personed enemy that then eats and Inflict Wounds, they're going to get critically hit by that for double damage, and that will almost always wipe them out in one shot in the early game. Spiritual Weapon also gives us a great bonus action. We can use it to block doorways, distract enemies, or just add a little bit of extra damage. Just smooths out the whole party's progression in the early game. At character level 5, we of course get 3rd level spell slots, which let us upcast Inflict Wounds for even more damage, and an additional cantrip, which in this case is going to be Blade Ward. Blade Ward is very useful for this character because you can protect your temporary hit points that we're going to get from Spore Druid by using Blade Ward, and of course we're a melee character, so sometimes we're going to be out of position and just need to buy a turn for our allies to come help us. We also get a feat, and the feat that we get to take here is one that wasn't usable really for this character previously, but thanks to a bug fix has become excellent. One of the main difficulties when playing a Death Cleric or a Spore Druid and trying to actually use their melee attacks is that you don't get extra attacks, so you're stuck with one attack per turn. That means that all of the extra damage that you're getting from your Spore Druid, symbiotic entity damage, and your extra damage from Divine Strike and Touch of Death from Death Cleric can only be used so many times, and if you miss, it's devastating. However, thanks to the fixes to Polearm Master in Hotfix 30, we can use this alongside a staff and use our bonus action to attack a second time. Now the game will apply our full damage from additional effects to this bonus action attack. So we can use Divine Strike with it, we can use Symbiotic Entity damage with it, none of which was possible before. So thanks to this bug fix, this character becomes a much, much more threatening melee fighter. And we also get the opportunity attacks when enemies come towards us. Since we're going to be concentrating on spells and are a spellcaster, enemies are going to prioritize targeting this character, and melee enemies will prioritize getting into contact with us. Using our reaction for a quick attack against them, often with a huge amount of burst damage attached to it, can just wipe out enemies before they get to us, and increases our damage output with this character tremendously. It's really cool, I think, that we can now make an actual staff fighting character, and Polearm Master lets us do that. At character level 6, we're taking our 5th level of Cleric, because of course this gets us 3rd level Cleric spells, including the Animate Dead that we get as a Death Cleric, which is a great spell for buffing up our party throughout the entire adventuring day, summoning hordes of zombies from the corpses of our enemies, and we also get the always incredible Spirit Guardians. As a Death Cleric, also, once we hit level 6 in Death Cleric, enemies will not be able to resist the necrotic version of Spirit Guardians, so enemies with necrotic resistance that you don't want to hit with radiant damage, or that have resistance to both damage types, you can use the necrotic version of Spirit Guardians. It's obviously not going to be used as often as the radiant version in most cases, but it gives you a great option in the fights where it is important to not use radiant damage, or where enemies have resistance to both kinds of damage. You can bypass that thanks to the necrotic damage from Spirit Guardians. For prepared spells at this level, of course, we're going to go ahead and pick up Spirit Guardians, which is going to be our mainstay damage over time spell in combination with our weapon attacks. This just gives us incredible damage round after round after round in combat, and Glyph of Warding. You can also take Mass Healing Word for this character. Remember, we have Healing Word from our Druid levels, so that's why it's not showing up in prepared spells. If you're using the buff on heal items, Mass Healing Word lets you apply them to your whole party as a bonus action, which of course is very, very powerful, and those items are great for this character as well. But the real benefit here is that we got Spirit Guardians, which is even better for this melee-focused character than for other characters. Of course, we also want our attacks to hit as hard as possible, so at this level, we're going to move back into Druid in order to pick up Circle of the Spores. This gives us Symbiotic Entity, which, of course, you will sometimes lose the Symbiotic Entity damage because it is reliant on you maintaining a small number of temp HP, though we have ways to restore it, which I'll talk about in a second. But you're not reliant on this extra damage, it just buffs up your combat potential even further, and gives you a lot of extra options. We also get Bone Chill, so if you want to respec to take a different Cleric spell, you can pick up something like Resistance that we don't have at this point. Not necessary, but for sort of complete optimization, you may want to do that. And the Symbiotic Entity damage goes off on every one of our attacks, which is awesome. We also get Halo of Spores, which lets us use our reaction on turns where we're not making Polearm Master attacks for even more damage. There's also some really cool tricks you can do with Halo of Spores, especially if you're using the buff on heal items. Because this lets you heal as a reaction, which is something that most characters can't do. You can drop a potion on the ground and then hit it with Halo of Spores as a reaction to spend that on a quick heal for yourself, or even if you're grouped up very closely with your allies, for them, or they can drop potions and then you can Halo of Spores them in order to break a potion on an ally without using an action. Also works for bottles of water and stuff, but most often it's going to be used for a cheeky little heal trick. For our prepared spells at this level, of course, we're picking up Healing Word, Enhanced Leap, and Longstrider let us buff up our allies, and Create or Destroy Water is useful in a ton of circumstances, and we'll round that out with Fog Cloud as a no-save debuff that can blind enemies, especially if we've got them trapped in a hazardous location or next to us, which we'll get to in a second. Character level 8, we're going back to Cleric. It's important that we continue to boost our Touch of Death damage, which levels every time we take a Cleric level, and we also want to hit Cleric level 8 as soon as possible to add even more damage to every one of our melee weapon attacks. We also get Inescapable Destruction, which makes our spells, which makes our necrotic damage ignore resistance. The tooltip here says spells you cast, but it's actually all necrotic damage we deal, including that from our melee weapons. So very useful, since we're dealing so much melee damage, so much necrotic damage on every attack, that we now completely ignore resistance to it, which is a very commonly resisted type of damage. So this makes this character even more effective. Especially on into the late game when you're going to see this damage resistance a lot. At level 9, we're taking our 7th level of Cleric, getting 4th level Cleric spells, and alongside those 4th level Cleric spells, we also get, as a Death Domain Cleric, one of our most important spells, Blight. Blight by itself is not a super efficient spell, but it combines incredibly well with what this character is doing, because our intended weapon, the Staff of Cherished Necromancy, will let us cast it for free. The staff will let us, when we kill an enemy with a necromancy spell, we can freely cast necromancy spells once afterwards. So Blight will trigger that and will allow us to cast it for free, even upcasted because we have 5th level spell slots. In combination with Inflict Wounds, which we can also upcast, this gives us amazing burst damage, both at ranged and in melee, so is an incredibly important spell for us. Working extremely well with this character's kit, and of course ignoring resistances and everything as well. In addition to that, looks like my prepared spells got a little messed up here, so let's go ahead and fix those. In addition to that, we're going to go ahead and pick up the most important prepared spells from each level, so we'll grab Hold Person and Spiritual Weapon. We can add Aid back in at this point also, because we have these high-level spell slots and are a little behind in our spell progression, but a great use for those is casting Aid, which is an incredible tool for buffing up our entire party. We'll also, of course, pick Spirit Guardians and Glyph of Warding as a great non-concentration combat spell. Less important for this character, because we have Inflict Wounds and we have Blight, but still very, very useful. And then finally, you can round it out with your choice of a number of different other options here. We can take Mass Healing Word if you're using the buff on heal items. You can use Freedom of Movement as a panic button. Guardian of Faith is great for blocking doorways, and Banishment is useful for certain boss fights. In general, unless you're using the buff on heal items, Mass Healing Word isn't worth picking up. So Freedom of Movement makes a great panic button if an ally gets stunned, but those items are so good for this character that we'll probably end up with a prepared spell list that looks something like this. At character level 10, we get to take our 8th level of Cleric and pick up Divine Strike Necrotic. This lets us once per turn add a d8 of necrotic damage to our weapon attacks. This only works on melee weapon attacks, but this character is making a lot of those and is very powerful at doing so. So this is just a nice, every single turn we get to increase the damage of our weapons. Normally this is very difficult to use as a Death Cleric, because thanks to a UI bug, you can't cast Divine Strike and Touch of Death in the same attack. Because they both use the reactions menu, even though they don't cost you your actual reaction. And so the game will not let you use both of these at once, even if you set one of them to automatic. However, this character makes 2 attacks in a turn, so we have no problem with that conflict, and can use Divine Strike Necrotic for even more damage output, especially in turns where we're not using Touch of Death. For our feat selection at this level, well, we took Polearm Master, so even though we don't have a reach weapon, the feat that I'm going to suggest taking here is Sentinel. Sentinel will let us keep enemies trapped inside of our Spirit Guardians, which is very dangerous, and we can still stop enemies from moving. An enemy stuck next to us is going to be dying, and enemies are going to come to us because we're a spellcaster, so the AI is going to prioritize targeting this character. There's a lot of other great options as well if you find that this isn't, if you're just mostly focused on the spellcasting aspects of this character and don't need the weapon attacks as much. Then you can take Alert, of course, always incredible in Honor mode. You can pick up Warcaster to maintain concentration on your spells more easily if you're struggling with that. Lucky can give you some rerolls. Savage Attacker increases your weapon damage output a lot as well, though I think Sentinel is generally speaking going to be a little better than Savage Attacker just because it keeps enemies in your Spirit Guardian, so it'll be more damage overall. You can also take Great Weapon Master for flat damage increases, though again, I think we would rather, in general, have Sentinel. But all of those make great options if you don't want this feat for whatever reason, or are using a mod that gives you extra feats. Then at level 11, we're going to go back and take more levels of Spore Druid. This gets us a couple awesome things. Firstly, it just gets us more temp HP for Symbiotic Entity. At this point, even with resistance, enemies are going to be popping our temp HP in one hit, which obviously we don't want. So levels in Spore Druid do help with that. So taking a couple more levels is great, and it gets us another feat, which is going to be excellent for this character. We don't really need 6th level spells on this character, just the 6th level slots, which we get at this point because we have 11 total caster levels. Because our 6th level spell slots are almost always going to be upcasted Blights or upcasted Spirit Guardians or upcasted Inflict Wounds, rather than actually casting higher level spells. In addition to that, we also get some spells that are extremely useful even in the late game here. Spells like Spike Growth, which we can use as a game-winning combination if we have a Warlock ally with Hunger of Hadar, are excellent and will be extremely helpful. You can also slot in Enhance Ability to help with some late game skill checks, things like that. The big thing here is that Spike Growth is still good, even if you get it all the way in the end game. It's just that powerful a spell. But mostly, of course, we're taking additional levels in Spore Druid so that we can take a 4th Druid level and get another feat, rounding us out at 3 feats. And here we're just going to take an ability score improvement and max out our Wisdom for our spell save DCs. We've used Khalid's Gift or Ethel's Hair up to this point in order to hit 20 Wisdom, so we've maxed out our spell save DCs in combination with DC items and everything, so we should be landing our spells extremely reliably. Tragically, we can't take True Strike with our last cantrip here, so we're going to go ahead and take Poison Spray. It's the next most terrible option. Alright, my friends, that is the Death Dealer of Shar, but of course we can improve this character even further with items, so let's talk about those. for items for this character. There are very, very few items that we actually need, and most of the ones that we do want, very few other characters want. So this character can be very open with what gear it uses and can fit into a lot of parties very easily because there are very few gear conflicts with what other characters want. Firstly, of course, we want the Staff of Cherished Necromancy. This is going to be our best weapon. You can use Shillelagh before combat starts in order to make melee attacks with it, and it's not a bad weapon to attack with in melee. It has a 1d4 necrotic damage inherently, and it's a +2 weapon, so it's nothing special to hit enemies with, but it does get the job done. And then, of course, it also gives you disadvantage on saves for enemies against your necromancy spells, which a lot of our spells are going to be necromancy, and the free spell casts, so it's an incredibly powerful tool given how many necromancy spells we're going to cast. In addition to that, there are a couple other weapon options, though this is usually the strongest one. Firstly, in the early game, this is a build that gets a lot out of Nature's Snare. Ensnaring targets is really, really powerful, extremely strong in the early game, and doing it basically for free is excellent, and we want a staff that we can hit enemies with anyways, so Nature's Snare is really nice for that. And then Markahesh gear, of course, is great on any spellcaster. I duplicated the Staff of Cherished Necromancy here, so we could dual wield, I guess. Markahesh gear, of course, is amazing on any spellcaster, so always an option for this character. You can also just play this as a normal polearm build and stop using Shillelagh when you get to the later game and use something like Shar's Spear of Evening in combination with Strength Elixirs to just attack with this weapon instead. Obviously an incredibly powerful option just because of how strong this weapon is. In addition to the staff, you're going to want initiative gear. This character doesn't naturally get alert, so we are going to want that, at least some pieces of initiative gear to make sure that we can go before enemies. We want medium armor anyways, so the flame enameled armor is a really good option here. It gives you +2 to initiative, as well as resistances to fire and cold damage if you're using the fire shield. Again, we're going to be in melee, so the fire shield will actually do a bunch of damage as well. And it gives you +2 to your saves, so you're going to maintain concentration on your spells more easily. You can also just use the Helldusk armor. It gives you even more armor class, so it's going to be a very solid option also. For shield, you can use the Sentinel Shield for +3 to your initiative, and you can use the Hellrider Longbow for another +3. So if you want to, even without alert, as long as your other characters have taken alert, this character can still hit +11 initiative and still go before everybody, which is obviously going to be excellent. The other thing, of course, is that we want one stat item. So Khalid's Gift will take our wisdom up to 20, even despite only investing 1 ASI in it. You can also use Ethel's Hair or the Mirror in this case. You can stack those in order to get 22 wisdom as well. Not necessary, but will improve your save DCs and hit rolls with your Shillelagh weapons. If you are using a different stat item, there's a number of other great amulet options for us. Amulet of Greater Health, of course, excellent on every spellcaster, especially this one because we're concentrating on spells and in melee. So Greater Health Amulet is going to help us do both of those things better. Amulet of the Devout, amazing for any cleric, and spell save DCs matter a lot. And a sleeper hit for this character is the Surgeon's Subjugation Amulet. We have a lot of ways to get automatic critical hits, and this character also really wants the Luck of the Far Realms Illithid power, if you can get it. And so you can paralyze enemies and then get more automatic critical hits. As well, you're making a lot of your attacks with advantage, so you're going to get natural critical hits. So Surgeon Subjugation Amulet lets you paralyze a lot of enemies and is a really powerful and also quite thematic item for this character as well. The Buff on Heal item set is amazing, so the Whispering Promise and the Hellrider's Pride give you great early game power, and wearing those on into the late game is totally reasonable. You can also use a damaging pair of gloves, like the Dark Justiciar Gauntlets, for more necrotic damage, or you can add in more save DC and more damage as well, using the Helldusk gloves, for example. For your headgear, you are again just looking for spell save DC and spell attack rolls, so the Hood of the Weave is usually going to be the best in slot, though the Fistbreaker Helm, if you need one of these pieces of initiative gear for another character, can give you save DC and also give you bonus initiative, so is going to be excellent there as well. Another option if you want to lean more into melee attacks is the Diadem of Arcane Synergy. You'll inflict conditions pretty frequently with this character, especially if you add in ability drain from your illithid powers if you're taking those. And then Arcane Synergy means that your weapon attacks are going to deal even more damage. Arcane Synergy does work with Shillelagh, so it doubles your wisdom damage to damage. Also, because you are a wisdom-based attacker, ability drain from illithid powers will drain enemy wisdom, which can help you land your spells even more easily on them. So, because that's how Shillelagh works with ability drain, it uses the stat that you are using to attack with. More defensive options, you can use the Helldusk Helmet for immunity to critical hits, which is really nice for this character, of course. Or, since we're making weapon attacks and casting spells, we can always just use the Helmet of Arcane Acuity in order to stack up even higher save DCs and higher hit chance with our spells, so we can use that for a more powerful option. You can use it alongside the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel for bonus action commands, though since you're attacking with your bonus action most of the time, that won't work as well as it will for other characters. For your boots, the Boots of Striding make an excellent option, of course. Prone immunity, incredible on this character. We're always going to be concentrating on spells, so this will give us momentum and prone immunity, which will prevent us from losing concentration and let us get to enemies more easily with our Spirit Guardians. Or, of course, we can use the Vital Conduit Boots trick, because we are a Spore Druid. Spore Druids have Symbiotic Entity, which gives them temporary hit points. Normally, you can't restore temporary hit points, but the Vital Conduit Boots allow you to actually restore your temp HP up to the maximum that you get from Spore Druid whenever you cast a concentration spell, and that concentration spell can include a cantrip. So if you cast Symbiotic Entity and then take some damage, you can refill that without having to spend another Wild Shape charge in order to maintain that for much longer and get much tankier. Works especially well if you're getting damage resistances either from your armors, like we've talked about already, or from Bless and Blade Ward from the Reviving Hands in the late game, or just casting Blade Ward on yourself, which is a totally reasonable option for this character to spend a turn on. Casting Blade Ward is genuinely not a bad use of your first turn if you get surprised in combat or something, or don't prepare Shillelagh ahead of time. Blade Ward and Shillelagh as a setup turn, and then enemies walk towards you, is a totally reasonable thing to do if you are at long distances. Obviously not what you want to do, but sometimes in honor mode things happen, and that's a totally reasonable way to spend your first turn in order to maximize your defensive stats before casting Spirit Guardians and running in. In the end game, my suggestion for the best option is the Hood of the Weave here. The Flame Enameled Armor is usually going to be the most powerful. And then we still want the buff on heal items, so we're going to use those. We'll use the Boots of Striding. Vital Conduit Boot trick is useful, but will end up being outscaled by incoming enemy damage later on, and then the initiative gear and the Staff of Cherished Necromancy. Then you can fill out your cloak slot and your other ring slot, and Khalid's Gift, of course, and then you can fill out your cloak slot and your other ring slot with whatever you prefer to use. Alright, my friends, I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and of course, as always, if you have, feel free to leave a comment and hit like. Helps me out with the algorithm, so I really appreciate you taking the time to do that, and you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, folks. I'll catch you next time.